The rain drizzled gently over the glistening streets of Los Angeles, the soft hum of water blending with the distant sounds of the city. At a small gas station, the neon glow of its sign cast flickering reflections on the wet asphalt. Keanu Reeves, clad in a rain-dampened jacket, pulled up on his motorcycle and parked under the awning. As he removed his helmet, droplets slid off its surface, and he shook it lightly before glancing around. Under the dim shelter of the station, a young woman moved briskly between gas pumps. Her belly, heavy with pregnancy, strained against her jacket as she carried boxes and wiped windshields with practiced precision. Her face betrayed exhaustion, yet she greeted each customer with a polite, if weary, smile. Despite her struggle, she moved with purpose, determined to keep up with the demands of the night. Not far from her, a little girl sat quietly on a worn plastic chair beside a battered table. She seemed oblivious to the drizzle and the bustle around her, her focus wholly absorbed in a notebook. With a small red pencil clutched tightly in her hand, she sketched diligently, her brow furrowed in concentration. The notebook's pages were dog-eared and stained, evidence of countless hours spent creating. Keanu stood quietly under the gas station's awning, the faint neon glow casting soft shadows across his face. The rain fell steadily, its rhythmic pattern blending with the hum of his motorcycle nearby. His sharp features, so often marked by a quiet intensity, softened as his gaze rested on the scene before him. A young woman moved with purpose, her every step imbued with determination despite the weight of exhaustion she carried. Beside her, a small child sat engrossed in her notebook, her tiny hand carefully sketching lines on the worn page with a red pencil. There was something about the pair that rooted Keanu to the spot. As if an invisible thread had tied him to their story. He watched the woman's movements, the slight limp in her step, the way she carried each box with care despite her obvious fatigue. He noticed the child's quiet focus, her world contained within the pages of her notebook, drawing a life that seemed far removed from the rain-soaked gas station. Keanu slid his hands into his pockets, his eyes lingering on the woman as she paused to adjust her jacket against the chill. A sense of unease settled over him, but it was tempered by something deeper, a compassion that refused to let him walk away. He knew there was more to their story than what meets the eye. This wasn't just another passing scene in the rain. It was a moment steeped in resilience, hardship, and perhaps, even a glimmer of hope. The hum of his motorcycle vibrated softly, a subtle reminder that he had somewhere else to be. But Keanu stayed, unmoving. The steady rain on the awning echoed the quiet urgency in his chest, compelling him to step forward. This wasn't a moment to merely observe. It was one that demanded action, a chance to connect, to offer something more than a fleeting glance. And in that stillness, he decided, he wouldn't just watch. He would find a way to make a difference. Emily, 7 months pregnant, braved the evening shift at the gas station with quiet determination. The biting cold seeped through her thin jacket, numbing her hands as she tirelessly scrubbed windshields, restocked shelves, and served customers. Every task felt heavier with the weight of her growing belly and the relentless fatigue that followed her. Yet, Emily pressed on, her focus unwavering. Each hour was a step toward keeping her small family afloat, a necessary battle she fought without complaint. Nearby, her 6-year-old daughter, Sophia, sat under the station's modest shelter, a worn plastic chair her perch for the evening. Her small hands clutched a blunt red crayon as she poured her concentration into an old activity book. Its pages bent and nearly used up. The world around her was small, confined to the gas station's rain-slicked lot. But Sophia's imagination knew no bounds. With each stroke of her crayon, she created pictures of warmth and light, a kitchen filled with fresh flowers, a sunny backyard, or a cozy room with soft rugs and glowing lamps. Her drawings stood in sharp contrast to the cold, fluorescent-lit reality she lived in, a testament to the innocence and resilience that only a child could carry in such circumstances. Emily would glance over at her daughter between tasks, her tired eyes softening at the sight. Sophia's quiet focus was a reminder of why she worked so hard. even in the harshness of the world around them. Sophia's simple joys and dreams gave Emily the strength to keep going. The gas station was far from a place of comfort. But for the two of them, it was a temporary haven, a place where Emily's determination and Sophia's imagination created small moments of hope in the midst of hardship. As the evening grew darker, a sleek black motorcycle rolled into the station, its engine purring smoothly before shutting off. The rider, dressed in a weathered leather jacket, removed his helmet, revealing the familiar face of Keanu Reeves. Most people would have recognized him instantly, but Emily barely spared him a glance. She was too busy hauling a box of supplies from the small store to the pumps. Every step a reminder of her growing exhaustion. Keanu, however, noticed her. There was something in the way she carried herself, the weariness etched into her every movement. The way she instinctively placed a protective hand over her belly, that struck him deeply. His gaze shifted to Sophia, who was hunched over her book, her brow furrowed in concentration. He took a step closer, curious about the little girl's world. Sophia's drawing caught his attention, a cheerful kitchen filled with warmth and life. The table was set with food. A vase of fresh flowers sat in the center, and soft sunlight poured in through an open window. It was a vision far removed from the chilly, fluorescent-lit gas station. Keanu crouched down beside her, his voice gentle. "That's a beautiful picture," he said, his tone warm and genuine. "Do you like to draw?" Startled, Sophia looked up, her wide brown eyes meeting his. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I like drawing places I want to go," she said softly, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the station. Keanu smiled, his heart aching at the innocence in her words. Before he could say more, Emily approached, her posture protective, her voice polite but firm. "Sophia, don't bother the gentleman," she said, glancing at Keanu apologetically. "She's not bothering me," Keanu replied, his tone reassuring. He looked at Emily, then back at Sophia. "She's sharing her dreams." Emily froze for a moment, caught off guard by his kindness. Her defenses softened slightly, but her weariness remained visible. "She loves drawing," Emily admitted quietly, her voice carrying a mix of pride and resignation. "It keeps her busy while I work." Keanu nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "She's got talent," he said, looking at the little girl's drawing again. "And dreams as big as this picture." Sophia's cheeks flushed with pride, but she stayed quiet, her small hands fidgeting with her crayon. Emily shifted on her feet, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to strangers taking such an interest in their lives. And certainly not someone like Keanu Reeves. The conversation lingered in the air for a moment before Keanu spoke again, his voice carrying a quiet conviction. "Sometimes, dreams start small," he said, his words directed at both Emily and Sophia. "But with a little help, they can grow into something extraordinary." Emily's eyes flickered with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She wanted to believe in the kindness of strangers, but life had taught her to be cautious. Yet, something about Keanu's presence felt different. His sincerity was undeniable, and his words carried a weight that touched her deeply. As the evening wore on, Keanu stayed a little longer, helping Emily carry supplies and chatting with Sophia about her favorite things to draw. By the time he left, the cold air felt a little less harsh, the weight on Emily's shoulders a little lighter. As he drove off into the night, Emily watched the taillights of his motorcycle disappear down the road. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that even in the toughest moments, kindness could still find its way into their lives. The drizzle had turned into a sharp, biting chill as the night deepened, wrapping the gas station in a blanket of damp cold. Emily leaned heavily against the pump, her breath clouding in the air as she tried to ease the relentless ache in her back. She wiped the moisture from her face with trembling hands. Though it wasn't just the drizzle that made her shiver, it was exhaustion. Her eyes, darkened with sleepless nights and countless worries, flickered with the quiet resolve of someone who didn't cry, who couldn't afford to. Keanu approached carefully, his footsteps soft against the wet pavement. There was no rush in his movements, only a quiet, steady concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with genuine care. "You look like you've been on your feet too long." Straightening immediately, Emily forced her tired face into a mask of composure. "I'm fine," she replied, brushing off the question as if the pain didn't matter. "Just a little back pain. It comes with the territory," she added, resting her hand lightly on her pregnant belly. Keanu's brow furrowed, his expression one of quiet understanding. "That doesn't mean it should be constant," he said gently but firmly, his words laced with both compassion and a touch of challenge. Emily turned her gaze away, avoiding his piercing eyes. "It's just life," she murmured, her voice tinged with resignation. "Bills don't stop coming, and my daughter deserves better than this." From her spot nearby, Sophia's soft voice broke the silence. "Mama does everything for me," she said, her words filled with quiet admiration. Emily's composure faltered, her shoulders slumping as she turned toward her daughter. Her lips trembled, and for the briefest moment, the weight she carried became visible. "You're my reason, Soph," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "My reason for everything." Sophia's wide, innocent eyes shone with an understanding far beyond her years. She offered a small, reassuring smile, her tiny fingers clutching the worn edge of her notebook. Keanu stood silently, watching the tender exchange between mother and daughter. His chest felt heavy, not with pity, but with a deep respect for the woman before him. This wasn't just a mother working to get by. This was a fighter. A woman who had dedicated every ounce of her strength, every sleepless night, and every aching muscle to giving her daughter a chance at something more. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice carrying a quiet sincerity. "You're stronger than most people I know," he said, his words cutting through the cold like a warm embrace. "But even the strongest people need a little help sometimes." Emily looked back at him, her guard still raised but her expression softening slightly. She wasn't used to kindness like this, unexpected and unwavering. "Help doesn't come for free," she said, her voice low. Keanu shook his head, a faint, knowing smile on his face. "Not everything has to cost something," he said simply. "Sometimes, people just want to help because it's the right thing to do." Emily stared at him, her walls beginning to crack. She didn't respond, but the flicker of hope in her eyes told Keanu that his words had touched something deep within her. As the cold wind blew gently through the station, the silence between them felt almost sacred. The hum of the gas station lights and the distant sound of passing cars filled the void. But within this small corner of the world, something profound had shifted. Sophia, sensing the moment, stood up and walked over to her mother, slipping her tiny hand into Emily's. "Mama, we're okay," she said softly, her voice carrying a wisdom that belied her age. Emily looked down at her daughter, her heart swelling with love and pain all at once. She squeezed Sophia's hand, drawing strength from the little girl who had become her entire world. Keanu watched them, his resolve strengthening. This wasn't just a passing moment for him, this was a call to action. As he walked back to his motorcycle, he knew he couldn't simply leave things as they were. He wasn't sure how just yet, but he would find a way to lighten their load, even if only for a little while. The night pressed on, the cold growing sharper, but within the gas station's flickering lights, there was a warmth, a quiet, unspoken bond formed between three souls, each fighting their own battles in different ways. For Emily, that night marked the first time in a long time that she felt seen, truly seen, and for Sophia, her dreams of a brighter future felt a little closer, a little more possible, and for Keanu, it was a reminder of the power of kindness, a force capable of transforming even the coldest nights into something meaningful. A mother's unseen battle. As Emily returned to her tasks, Keanu remained close to Sophia, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. The little girl gripped her red pencil tightly, her small fingers trembling as she focused on the worn page in her notebook. Each stroke of the pencil seemed deliberate, though her hand wavered slightly, a quiet determination evident in her movements. Sophia's voice broke the silence, soft and almost hesitant, but filled with a weight far too heavy for someone her age. "Mama cries sometimes," she said, her words carrying a quiet sadness that made Keanu's chest tighten. He took a moment, his voice gentle but steady. "Why does she cry?" he asked, careful not to push too hard. Sophia's gaze remained fixed on her drawing, her small shoulders slumping slightly. "Because she's tired," she whispered, her voice so faint it almost got lost in the hum of the gas station lights. "And because Papa left when he found out about the baby. He said he didn't want another mouth to feed." Keanu felt his breath catch, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. He glanced toward Emily, who was walking back toward the counter, her steps slow and uneven. She was limping slightly, struggling under the weight of a heavy box she carried with both hands. In that moment, it wasn't just her physical exhaustion that stood out, it was the emotional and financial burdens she carried alone. The quiet strength she summoned each day to keep moving forward. His gaze returned to Sophia, who had returned to her drawing, her small face etched with quiet focus. The raw honesty in her words, paired with the determination he saw in Emily's every movement, left Keanu deeply moved. It wasn't just their circumstances that struck him, it was their resilience in the face of so much. In the dim light of the station, he resolved to do something, anything, to ease the burden they carried. This was more than just a fleeting encounter, it was a moment that demanded action. A call to kindness he couldn't ignore. When Emily finally sat down beside Sophia, her body seemed to collapse into the seat, weighed down by exhaustion. Her shoulders slumped, and her hands rested limply in her lap, the day's labor visibly etched into every line of her face. Yet, despite the weariness, she reached over to gently smooth Sophia's hair, her touch tender and deliberate. Keanu crouched beside them, his movements deliberate, his presence calm but unwavering. He looked at Emily, his voice soft yet filled with resolve. "No one should have to carry so much alone," he said, his words steady and heartfelt. "Especially someone as strong as you." Emily turned her tired eyes toward him, and for the first time that evening, her guarded expression cracked ever so slightly. There, in the safety of his kindness, she allowed herself a flicker of vulnerability. "Strong doesn't feel like enough anymore," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth she had tried to suppress. Keanu nodded, his gaze steady and compassionate. Without saying another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he retrieved a folded envelope. Holding it out toward her, he said simply, "Let me help." Emily recoiled instinctively, shaking her head. Even in her exhaustion, pride and self-reliance rose to the surface. "I can't take that," she said firmly, though her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I can't accept charity." "This isn't charity," Keanu replied, his tone firm but warm, his eyes locking with hers. "This is about recognizing the strength it takes to keep going, even when it feels impossible. And it's about making sure that Sophia knows her dreams are worth believing in." Emily stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as her resolve began to falter. Sophia, sensing the weight of the moment, looked up at her mother with wide, questioning eyes. "Mama?" she asked softly, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. Emily hesitated, her hands hovering over the envelope. Every instinct in her told her to decline, to prove that she could handle this alone. But then she looked at Sophia, her little girl, who had spent so many nights in the corner of this gas station, drawing dreams of a better life on crumpled pages. She thought of the weight she carried, the exhaustion she felt every single day, and the moments she had to push through when she had nothing left to give. Her fingers finally closed around the envelope, her grip tentative as if it might disappear the moment she touched it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of the moment. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped him away, not wanting to cry in front of her daughter. Keanu stood, a kind smile spreading across his face. "Sometimes, we all need a little help," he said simply, his voice calm and sincere. "And sometimes, it's okay to accept it." Sophia's small voice broke the silence that followed. "Is this for Mama's back pain?" she asked, her innocent question carrying the weight of her understanding. Keanu crouched again to meet Sophia's gaze. "It's for Mama," he said gently, "and for you. It's to make sure you both have what you need so you can keep dreaming and drawing." Sophia's lips curled into a small smile, her eyes lighting up as she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, her words sincere. Emily, still clutching the envelope, looked at Keanu with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't know how to repay you," she said softly, her voice breaking again. "You don't have to," Keanu replied, his tone steady. "The only thing I ask is that you take care of yourself. You're already doing so much for Sophia. Don't forget that you deserve care, too." Emily's eyes glistened, and for the first time in a long while, a small weight seemed to lift off her shoulders. The cold air around them felt a little less biting, the fluorescent lights of the gas station a little less harsh. Keanu stood and glanced down at Sophia's drawing, still sitting open on her lap. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing to her picture. "It's a house with a big kitchen," Sophia said shyly. "I drew it for Mama. She says kitchens are the heart of the home." Keanu smiled, his heart warmed by the simple yet profound sentiment. "That's a beautiful dream," he said, "and dreams like that are worth holding on to." As he walked back to his motorcycle, Emily called out softly, "Keanu." He turned, his helmet tucked under one arm. "I don't have the words," she said, her voice trembling but filled with gratitude. "But thank you for seeing us, for helping." Keanu's expression softened, his kind smile returning. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, "and I have no doubt that one day, Sophia will be drawing pictures of the life you made for her, a life full of everything she's ever dreamed of." With that, he put on his helmet and climbed onto his motorcycle. The engine roared to life, and as he pulled away, Emily and Sophia watched the taillights fade into the distance. For a moment, they sat there in silence, the envelope still in Emily's hands. She opened it hesitantly, her breath catching at the sight of the bills inside, a gesture that meant so much more than money. It was hope. That night, as Emily and Sophia walked home together under the stars, there was a quiet sense of peace between them. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt less alone, and Sophia's little hand in hers reminded her that their dreams, however big or small, were still worth believing in. The rain fell steadily that night, enveloping the small gas station in a somber rhythm that matched the quiet hum of its fluorescent lights. Emily stood behind the counter, her hands absently organizing a small stack of receipts while her mind wandered. The faint chill of the evening seeped through the cracks in the door, but she barely noticed. Across from her, Sophia sat on a stool, her small hands moving a red pencil across a dog-eared notebook. She was lost in her own world of drawings, her face lit with a soft focus that contrasted sharply with the weary lines on Emily's. The door chime jingled, breaking the stillness. Keanu stepped in, brushing rain off his weathered leather jacket. His boots left faint trails of water on the floor, but his presence brought a quiet warmth that seemed to counter the cold outside. He approached the counter slowly, his demeanor calm but curious, as if he were trying to step gently into their lives. As Emily looked up, their eyes met briefly before hers flickered back to the register. Keanu leaned slightly against the counter, his voice soft but probing. "If you could change one thing in your life," he asked, "what would it be?" The question hung in the air for a moment, heavier than the rain tapping against the station windows. Emily hesitated, her gaze dropping to the wet floor beneath her feet. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "When you're raising a child and scraping by to make rent, there's no room for what-ifs." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He nodded, his expression a mixture of understanding and quiet determination. "I can't say I know what that feels like," he admitted after a pause, his voice steady. "But surely, there's something you've always wanted. Something just for you." Emily's lips parted slightly, but before she could answer, Sophia's small voice broke the silence. "Mama makes the best lasagna in the whole world," she said, a shy smile spreading across her face as she continued to draw. Emily let out a soft laugh, the sound delicate and fleeting, like a small bird taking flight. But underneath the laughter was a sadness she couldn't quite hide. Making lasagna at home isn't the same as running a restaurant, she said, shaking her head slightly, as if dismissing the thought entirely. Keanu's expression shifted, his gaze narrowing just enough to show he was piecing something together. But you wanted one, didn't you? He asked gently. A restaurant? Emily's posture stiffened, and her hands stopped fidgeting with the receipts. She took a breath, her voice softer now, almost as if she was speaking to herself. A long time ago, before Marco left. We talked about it all the time. It was our dream. She paused, her eyes distant. But dreams don't last when reality sets in. Keanu studied her for a moment, noticing the way her shoulders sagged slightly under the weight of memories she hadn't spoken of in years. Dreams don't have to disappear forever, he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. Sometimes they just get put away for a while. Emily's eyes flicked to him, a hint of disbelief mingling with curiosity. Reality doesn't wait for dreams, she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. Not when you've got bills to pay and a daughter to raise. Sophia looked up again, sensing the shift in her mother's tone. Mama, she said softly, you said dreams make us brave. Emily's expression softened as she turned to her daughter. She crouched down slightly to brush a strand of hair out of Sophia's face. Her touch tender. That's right, sweet girl, she murmured. Dreams do make us brave. But sometimes. Her voice faltered, and she glanced at Keanu briefly before continuing. Sometimes life makes you forget how to dream. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, the weight of their conversation settling heavily in his chest. This wasn't just a woman who had given up. This was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her child. Who had pushed aside her own dreams to ensure Sophia could have hers. For a while, they all sat in the quiet. The sound of rain outside the only interruption. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. I'll be back tomorrow, he said, his tone resolute but kind. And I'd like to talk more about this restaurant of yours. Emily blinked, startled by his words. Keanu, I appreciate the thought, but, he raised a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. No arguments, he said with a faint smile. Just think about it. Okay, she hesitated, unsure of what to make of him. Finally, she nodded, though it was clear she didn't quite believe anything would come of it. Okay, she said quietly, as Keanu pulled his helmet on and stepped back into the rain. Emily watched him through the glass door. There was something about him, a quiet resolve that unsettled her, but also made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Sophia tugged gently at her sleeve. Mama, she said, her voice filled with childlike wonder. Do you think Mr. Keanu believes in dreams? Emily looked down at her daughter, her heart aching and full all at once. Maybe, she said softly, her gaze shifting back to the rain-soaked figure walking toward his motorcycle. Maybe he does. As the roar of Keanu's engine faded into the distance, Emily stood in the quiet gas station, the envelope still sitting in her pocket from earlier that evening. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might feel like to dream again. And for the first time in years, the rain didn't feel so cold. As Marcus drove through the city streets, his mind replayed the day's events. The interaction with Officer Harkins, though brief, left a profound impact on him. He had seen officers apologize before, but there was something different about Harkins. The man's regret felt genuine, and while Marcus wasn't one to give empty forgiveness, he also believed in the power of change. People could learn, grow, and do better, but only if they truly wanted to. He pulled into the driveway of his modest home, the evening air crisp and cool. Inside, the familiar hum of his life awaited him, a stack of books on the coffee table, a half-finished cup of tea from that morning, and the quiet rhythm of his thoughts. Yet tonight, something felt different. As he sat down, folder in hand, Marcus reflected on the invitation from Captain Bennett. Becoming a consultant for the precinct was not something he had anticipated, but the opportunity felt too important to pass up. Opening the folder, he scanned through the details. The precinct had outlined a comprehensive plan, regular training workshops, community engagement sessions, and even a mentorship program for younger officers. It was ambitious, but ambition was what the system needed. Marcus smiled to himself. Change wasn't easy, but the seeds were being planted. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct earlier than usual. He had agreed to meet with Captain Bennett to finalize his involvement in the initiative. As he walked through the halls, he noticed subtle changes. Officers greeted him with nods of respect, and the usual bustling chatter seemed tempered with an undercurrent of reflection. The training sessions had started to leave their mark. In Bennett's office, the captain greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Marcus. I trust you've had time to review the materials." "I have," Marcus replied, taking a seat. "It's a solid start, but there's still a lot of work to do." Bennett leaned forward, her expression serious. "I know. That's why I need someone like you on board. Your experience, your perspective, it's exactly what we need to guide this precinct forward." Marcus nodded. "I appreciate the trust, Captain, but I want to make sure this isn't just about ticking boxes or looking good on paper. If we're going to do this, it has to be real." Bennett smiled faintly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Their discussion turned to logistics. Marcus would work closely with a team of officers to develop and implement the programs. He would also liaise with community leaders, ensuring their voices were heard in shaping the precinct's future. As they finalized the details, a knock at the door interrupted them. "Come in," Bennett called. Officer Jenkins stepped inside, his expression hesitant but determined. "Captain, Mr. Davis," he began, addressing them both, "I wanted to share something. After the training yesterday, a few of us got together to talk. It wasn't official or anything, but I think we're starting to understand what you've been saying." Marcus tilted his head slightly, intrigued. "What did you talk about?" Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to these kinds of conversations. "About trust, about how we've been handling things and how it affects the people we're supposed to protect. I think, for the first time, we're seeing how much our actions matter, not just to us, but to the whole community." Marcus exchanged a glance with Bennett, who nodded in quiet approval. "That's a good start, Officer Jenkins," Marcus said, "but understanding is just the first step. The real challenge is turning that understanding into action." Jenkins nodded. "We're ready to try." After Jenkins left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Moments like that give me hope, Captain. If even one officer is willing to reflect and change, it can ripple outward." Bennett smiled. "It's why we do this, isn't it?" Over the following weeks, Marcus dove headfirst into his new role. He spent hours working with officers, running workshops that forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. He introduced scenarios that mirrored real-life situations, encouraging them to think critically about their decisions and the biases that might influence them. One afternoon, during a session on de-escalation, an older officer raised his hand. "Mr. Davis, I've been on the force for 25 years. Sometimes, it feels like the world is moving too fast for me to keep up. How do I make sure I don't fall behind?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "By staying open," he said. "The moment you stop learning, you stop growing. Policing is about more than enforcing laws. It's about serving people. And people change. Societies change. If you can adapt and listen, you'll always find a way forward." The officer nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Outside the precinct, Marcus worked just as hard to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. He attended community meetings, listened to concerns, and facilitated conversations between residents and officers. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crack, allowing understanding and empathy to seep through. One evening, after a particularly intense workshop, Marcus found himself alone in the precinct's break room. Harkins walked in, hesitating when he saw Marcus. After a moment, he approached. "Mr. Davis," he began, his tone unsure, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About trust. I've spent years seeing the worst in people, and I think I let that cloud my judgment, but I want to do better." Marcus studied him for a moment before replying. "It's not easy to unlearn years of habits, Officer Harkins, but the fact that you're willing to try, that's where change begins." Harkins nodded, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." As the weeks turned into months, the precinct began to transform. It wasn't perfect, change never was, but it was progress. Officers who had once been resistant to the training now approached Marcus with questions, eager to learn. Community members who had once viewed the precinct with suspicion began to participate in workshops and meetings. And through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't walking it alone.